Now, Jam, have you ever taken a home pregnancy test?
I've not, but I have been around them.
Yeah.
And their results have affected my life in many ways.
Yeah. Have they?
Yeah.
Having children, perhaps?
Yes.
Be born into the world?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, do you remember wondering, how did that test work?
Yes. And I have talked with my wife who works in the medical field.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Not about the way exactly that they work in detail, but when I've been like, okay, so are we sure?
Yeah.
And she's said many times, it's way easier to get a false negative than a false positive.
Yep.
On these, the way they work, that kind of stuff. And she's talked a bit about what it's kind of testing for, what it's looking for the presence of.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of it. Not exactly the chemistry connection and stuff in the ways that you referenced it in the other episode.
Okay.
So for some reason, M didn't even mention capillary action.
How could she?
I don't know. It's kind of like, what is chemistry? Chopped liver?
I know. It's almost like she doesn't care about chemistry or this podcast at all.
I know.
Whatever, Emily. One time, actually, Emily was I guess maybe she missed us because she was working a lot at this time in her life. It was when she was working at nights a lot, I think. Mm-hmm. She was like, I was listening to y'all's podcast, and I was surprised because, she listens to us talk all the time.
Yeah, it's like, I'm not that... Yeah, you and I are not offended that people like that close to us in our lives are not listening all the time.
Yeah, Mason used to listen before we got married.
Right. Yeah.
So, but she said, and I realized you're so much more curious than me. She was like, all these things happen and I don't care why they happen.
Yeah.
So that kind of reminded me
That's
of
very
that.
funny. That's funny because I use that exact descriptor about M's mom, my mother-in-law who lives with us.
Oh, yeah.
She is very genuinely curious in a way that I thought I was a pretty curious person, but I am very selectively curious about
me too.
some things, including chemistry here and being involved in it. Like, I would not do that if I was not curious to learn from you about it.
Yeah, thanks for doing that.
But there's so many things that I am not curious about. You know what I mean? That when I've met someone like Barb, I'm like, oh, she's curious about everything.
Yeah.
So that's funny.
I realized that we haven't even done the intro, but I was thinking recently that I was like, if Jam hadn't been like, I want to spend hours of my life every month learning about this podcast, many people would have missed out, including myself, on all the fun things that this podcast does for us. So thanks for being our learner.
Well, you're welcome. I mean, we've talked about both loving podcasts so that it doesn't feel weird, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like, man, I really just had to grit my teeth and learn chemistry. It feels like I could listen to a podcast about chemistry or I could be in a podcast about chemistry.
Yeah.
Either way, I'm getting like a podcast version of chemistry, which would be like the best. So I don't know. It's like
pretty amazing.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like I don't know, like obviously there's work to it, but we both have the things that we love about it that make it fun. So yeah.
Well, I was just thinking about that lately. And so I think I speak for all of our listeners when I say thanks for asking the questions and not being a chemist.
Yeah. Y'all are welcome. As much as I learn about chemistry, I still will not be a chemist. And so, y'all are very welcome.
Well, on that note, shall we dive in?
Let's do it.
Hey, I'm Melissa.
I'm Jam.
And I'm a chemist.
And I'm not, still not.
And welcome to Chemistry for Your Life,
the podcast that helps you understand the chemistry of your everyday life.
All right. Well, now we know Latila asked this question, but before we really get started, we want to dedicate this episode to our newest member of our community. This is Vince W. He joined at the end of March, and we're a little bit off on our recording schedule, so you might not be hearing this until May. But Vince, thank you so much. We're so excited to have you as part of our community.
Yes, thank you for joining. Thank you for helping keep the show going and keeping it free for everybody. We could not do this without our community members, Chem community members. So thank you, Vince, for joining our super cool Chem community. We're looking forward to getting to know you. And this whole episode's dedicated to you.
Yeah. And if you ever have a pregnancy test that impacts your life, hopefully you'll remember that this episode was dedicated to you.
Yeah.
And you'll just play it back again.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of fun.
Yeah.
All right. So the chemistry of pregnancy tests. So there is a lot of chemistry, really biochemistry.
Right.
That's happening here. And of course, the first thing that I want to say is capillary action is the thing that is driving, literally is moving the urine across the test strip.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned that's called laminar flow. And so the capillary action, which if you have not listened to last week's episode, that it's almost like a two-parter, but kind of a weird two-parter, but they're very related in my mind. That is all about water and the movement of water and how the way that water is has the electrons distributed and makes it so that water is really good at sort of holding hands with other water molecules and with other things that it can stick to. And so the literal strip that we use in a pregnancy test when we say pee on a strip is a made up of something that water can bind to, essentially, but not in a chemical bond sort of way, but in an intermolecular force. It's attracted to it. So that is why the water is able to sort of soak up the strip.
Okay.
And why capillary action works in this sideways motion.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the first bit of chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the second bit of chemistry is when people get pregnant, the first thing that happens, often the first hormone that's detectable, is called human choriogonadotropin. I can't make my font bigger, and so I'm hoping, but it's often just called HCG.
Okay.
That is first produced to get progesterone, which is needed to, keep the pregnancy going.
Mm-hmm.
So it's often produced. So it's produced during pregnancy or by some tumors. So if you have HCG in your blood or in your urine stream, it is because you're pregnant or because you have a tumor.
I see.
Typically.
Dang.
So if you get a positive pregnancy test, whether it's a pregnancy or not, it's probably good to talk to a medical professional.
Yeah, right.
So anytime you get that positive, there is a good chance that something's going on, that you have some of this hormone in your bloodstream.
Yeah.
Okay, so imagine peeing on the strip here. You get your urine to come into contact with this strip.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that would encounter as the laminar flow, the capillary action, is carrying the urine across this sort of, pathway, is an antibody. And so this is before it hits the colorful strip that you see. It's in the first clear part. And an antibody is a protein. We've talked about proteins a lot. Proteins are they're basically polymers. They're made up of these amino acids, and your body uses proteins for all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And your immune system often makes antibodies, usually to bind to something in order to wipe it out. So in COVID tests, which work very similarly, your body will have produced COVID antibodies.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, your urine encounters an antibody that is designed specifically to look for this HCG hormone and bind to it.
Got it.
So it has the right functional groups and the right intermolecular forces that can bind to this HCG hormone and only this HCG hormone.
Okay.
So if you kind of imagine an HCG hormone having a left side and a right side, this one is going to bind to one side of it.
Mm-hmm.
They're 3D. They have multiple binding sites. So it's designed for one specific site. It'll sort of hook on to this through intermolecular forces to this HCG.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side of this antibody is an enzyme that is designed to react with things and change colors.
Okay.
So you have this antibody, tons of this antibody.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much of it. And as the urine passes through sort of, you could just imagine this like field of antibodies. You're going to pick up and move the antibodies whether or not you have the HCG in your urine. But if you do have the HCG will bind to some of them.
Got it.
So now moving along in the flow is antibodies with enzyme, antibodies with enzyme bonded to HCG if you have it. And then we're moving down literally along the strip.
Got it.
And then we encounter what could appear, if it's a positive pregnancy test, as the first strip. Okay. Usually it's blue or pink.
Okay.
And what is present in this strip is now a second antibody.
Okay.
This antibody, however, is fused in place.
Okay.
So it won't move with the urine the way the first one did. And it is designed to pick up on the other side of the HCG hormone. So now we have those HCG hormones that have an antibody on one side of them. They will now form a bond or intermolecular force. So like they'll sort of bind, but not with probably an official bond to these other antibodies. So now they're stuck right there.
Okay.
And they're stuck right there with the opposite antibody and with that enzyme that's going to do a chemical reaction to change color.
Wow.
And so any of the HCG hormone that bonded to that first antibody with the color changing enzyme, as it starts to accumulate there and that reaction starts to happen, that is when you start to see the color change happening.
That's crazy that like, obviously all this is crazy, but then the extra level of like, and we want this one to stay where it is.
Yeah.
I'm sort of like, how do they control that? Because it would be crazy if it was like, okay, it's going to start happening, but it's going to keep moving. So you got to keep watching it. You know, It's like the color's going to change, but it's going to keep flowing.
Yeah.
To be like, oh, this area needs to be able to interact with, but not move. Like, what the heck?
Well, and something that I looked, I spent I'm not kidding, hours. Mason can attest to this. Trying to figure out is like, okay, but how does the dye not, do they have like something fixed on that site also that will interact with the dye only right there with the enzyme that does the color change only in that one place? And I could not find a satisfying answer. And the only thing I could think is it must be that so much of it amasses right there, and that must be where there is a reactant, that is why you can see the color only right there. Because sometimes you can kind of see, like, I don't know if you've ever noticed in the COVID test where even though you're not positive, you can kind of see a pink line moving at first.
Yeah.
So I think it's what that is. It's like the color change is going to happen one way or the other, but when they all get stuck there, that's why the color change concentrates right there.
Right.
That's the only thing I could think. I looked it up for so long.
Yeah.
And no one gave me a satisfying answer.
The whole thing is this is all crazy.
Okay, well, it gets crazier.
Oh, no.
Because the only way you're like, okay, my urine got there and it made that line dark, so it's probably positive. But to make sure that nothing went wrong, they have a second line. And that second line is designed to capture the free-floating antibodies with a flag on them that have no HCG. So we now have the first antibody that the HCG encounters and binds to, but there's tons of it, extra of it. And then it hits the first line, and any of it that had the HCG gets frozen there.
Got it.
But the free-flowing one keeps going in your urine in the capillary action. And then that, whether or not it has HCG, finds its own counteracting antibody that it'll bind to, and then amass there, and then turn that color.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because if, say, maybe the strip is ripped or something goes wrong and there's not antibodies binded to either site, you could have accidentally got a negative result just because maybe the urine never actually got there.
Oh, yeah, I see.
So that second strip tells you, okay, the urine is flowing and the antibodies are working. The dye is working. It's not expired. There's not anything wrong with it. This is a working pregnancy test, and there was not a detectable level of HCG in your urine to turn the first strip the right color.
Yeah.
even though the test is working.
Got it. That's helpful. That's smart.
So it is one way to insulate against it's much more likely to have false negatives.
Mm-hmm.
So isn't that wild?
Yeah, that's crazy.
I tried to think of a good analogy for this, and maybe you can help me. Kind of one of the only things I could think is like, if for some reason you like had a bunch of people carrying flags, I'm like, I can't quite figure it out. It was like how they all got stuck in one place, but the enzyme that changes color upon the chemical reaction is kind of like a flag. And if you get enough of the flags, you can sort of see them. And that will only happen if you have the HCG to amass them in the first strip.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it could be something like, I guess in some ways this wouldn't really include the test section, the second one, to make sure the test worked the correct way. But just like, I have thought about how much thought has to go into crowd control for events.
Okay.
You know, and think about how like, oh, only people with this ticket can get into this section or whatever. And so the flag, instead of being a flag, it's like a ticket or whatever. And there could be a bit of like, oh, there's tons of stuff. There's tons of people coming through. We got to have some system of getting the right people to this section, and they can be here. They're allowed to be here and stay. But in general, this substance that's flowing through just has tons of people.
Yeah.
And they all have tickets, but we're not caring about them right now. We don't care about what ticket they have or where they're going. We're looking for a specific group. And that's like a little different than the average. Like crowd control for a concert, you know? But
maybe it's like if for some reason the football players and the crowd are all together.
Yes.
But only the football players are wearing the jerseys. And so you like can sort of nab them and you're like, no, you have to come here and you have to come here. And you have to come here. And there's all these other people moving through and we don't care about them, but we need to get the football players to line up, kind of.
Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah, it was hard. It was very hard to think of it. And then, I had a few different analogies. It was like, it all does sort of fall apart at the like, okay, and then there's another thing. One thing I thought of was like, if you're trying to like move a group of people, you know, but it is hard to think about like, okay, what would this look like? So do you want to just try to maybe summarize what I said back? And then I did find some stuff about what could be doing some of the color changing that I think is interesting as sort of a fun fact.
Okay, yeah. So we, in our urine, always have lots of antibodies, that you said, correct? So we start there. If you are pregnant or have a type of tumor or whatever, but you know, more commonly probably pregnant, then you said HCG, right? You have a hormone. Is that what you said it's called?
It's a hormone.
A hormone, HCG, that would be attached to some antibodies. And so that would be, at the moment that you have that, really that hormone is there to start the process of producing progesterone. But we have it anyway. It's one of the earlier, I guess, proto things. So it's a good one to pick to try to look for.
Yeah.
And so that's in our urine. And so then when it is on this test strip, there's tons of other things in our urine, tons of antibodies for other stuff. But then there'd be these certain ones that have the HCG with it. And so they've been able to create an enzyme that is specifically, you know, created to attach to HCG antibodies but nothing else. So there's not something else that could do a sneaky kind of like antihistamine kind of, you know, or caffeine or any of those other kind of things that like can take the place of something else. Nothing that would naturally in our urine do that. And so whenever the enzyme binds to those, it continues to flow still. So it's like there's antibody with CHG with enzyme.
HCG.
Sorry, HCG. With HCG with the enzyme flowing still, flowing until it reaches the area where there's another enzyme that is looking for that trio.
Yep.
And when it finds that trio, it can capture it basically.
Yep.
Say, stay here.
Yeah.
And now that I've found you, I'm going to change colors. I'm going to like alert. I guess in the crowd control scenario, it could be like, I found one, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like you raise the alarm or whatever. And so as it's happening all across that section of the strip, as they're going across with the laminar flow situation, there'd be tons of those, enough to make that whole section light up.
Yep.
Lots of those people have found that trio and are lighting up saying we found it. But then everything that continues past it does not have HCG. And so did not have that other enzyme attached to it. And then also did not get sort of captured and stuck by the color sensitive enzyme. Yeah. The one that's supposed to change colors. And so they continue on to the second enzyme layer that is looking for any antibodies that do not have HCG and also don't have the didn't get attached to by that enzyme that is looking for the antibodies with the HCG, right?
The enzyme's actually still on it.
Oh, okay.
So it's enzymes on it either way.
Got it. Either way, but it's making sure that no HCG ones got through or that something just didn't go.
It's just making sure that the laminar flow got all the way there.
Got it. Got all the way there. And
that the basically that the strips haven't like expired because things break down, chemicals break down over time.
Right. So it's looking for the ones with the enzyme
without the HCG.
Without the HCG. Got it. Okay, yes. And then that's a test that the test worked.
Yep, exactly.
And that one also lights up or changes color. And so that's where the two lines come from. And successfully tested urine at that point.
Yeah. I thought of an analogy while you were talking.
Oh, yes.
Okay, because you were talking about captured.
Yes.
So like, okay, imagine we have a bunch of giant blue balls.
Okay.
Or I guess small blue balls and then big yellow ones. Okay. And there's way, way, way more of the blue ones than the yellow ones.
Okay.
And now we dump them all into a river.
Okay.
And the yellow and blue ones are designed to stick together.
Okay.
You can have one for each one.
Okay.
So the blue ones and the yellow ones, they find each other, they stick together, but there's way more blue ones.
Okay.
And they're flowing down this river. And so we now have a mixture of free-floating blue ones and then blue and yellow ones together. Okay. And then we come to a net. And this net is designed to capture. It's not going to let the stuck together yellow and blue balls through.
Okay.
But it will let all the blue ones through.
Okay.
And as those start to amass, the water right there starts to look, it's starting to look kind of like blue and yellow. Oh, we're starting to see a color here.
Yeah.
That net is what the antibodies are doing in the first one. So your HCG is like the yellow balls, they'll stick to the blue ones, and the blue ones are like the antibody with the enzyme that will change color when it gets there. So if those two are bonded together, they stop at the first line.
Okay.
But there's excess of those blue ones. So they can get through and then they'll get to a second net, and that net is designed to stop the blue balls, any leftover ones, just to make sure that the river is flowing and that, the nets are still working, basically. Mm-hmm. And then right there at that net, you're like, oh, the water right there is looking kind of blue again. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the analogy. First antibodies are designed to stop the complex.
Yes.
And the second one, and the complex is the enzyme is bound to the antibody and the antibody is bound to the HCG.
Okay.
And then it is kind of like a trio. And the first then like stationary antibody you get to is designed to capture that trio and stop it.
Got it.
But the duo of the antibody and the free-floating antibody and the enzyme, they're still just going on along. Mm-hmm. And that is to make sure that are the antibodies on the strips that are the nets basically working. So did we really get a false negative, or is this test working? Is this negative probably accurate? So maybe that's a better analogy.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's interesting.
Or maybe giant puzzle pieces. It's like you have these big puzzle pieces that are floating around, and then like you drop their mates in, but there's way more of the opposite piece. I don't know. Something like that. But essentially the strip is a immobilized strip of antibodies that's designed as a net to catch the HCG bound to the other thing. And as they amass, you start to see the color there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then the second one is a net that's designed to only catch the enzyme antibody. Doesn't matter if there's HCG there or not. It's not going to try to catch that.
Okay.
It's just trying to say, is the flow happening? Mm-hmm. Is my stationary antibody working the way it's supposed to? Mm-hmm. That's what that second strip is for.
Okay, cool.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. Well, here's something fun. You said and other things won't mess with this test because it's designed specifically for HCG. And that's true. But one of the markers that is sometimes used in these is something that binds with biotin, and the color change happens when it binds with biotin. And that can sort of amplify the signal. And I don't think, from everything I could find in at-home tests, it's a different kind. It works with hydrogen peroxide to make the color change happen. But if you use one of these biotin ones, you can accidentally trigger it thinking that there's a much higher concentration of whatever you have because the biotin is used to trigger this color change reaction. And so you're triggering more of the color change reaction than you're supposed to. So biotin can interfere with testing for levels of HCG, which at home doesn't matter because it's are you pregnant or are you not? That's the only question we're asking.
Yeah.
But later they can use testing of HCG to test for other things.
Interesting.
So the amount kind of starts to matter.
Yeah.
So how much biotin you're taking can impact, if you're taking it as a supplement,
right?
It can impact some of those results. Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
Yeah. Huh. And there was something else. Now I can't remember. We, full disclosure, I wrote this episode more than a week ago, and then we had several conflicts and had to mess
scheduling conflicts.
Scheduling our conflicts, not conflicts with each other.
We were fighting. We're not recording today.
And I had a conflict with my immune system.
Yes.
And so now the details are fuzzy, but it's people I think can use HCG as a doping thing and then mess with the results. I don't remember now. Dang it. But HCG, there was a lot of drama and biotin can do this and this matters because of that. So there was a lot more in the testing world than I knew.
Interesting.
And it made it harder to research just the pregnancy test because it thought I was looking in these other things how does biotin doping mess up your results for this? And I was no, I just want to know how the mechanism of the dye of the color change happens. So that was kind of a fun little thing that happened. But overall, it was really interesting. I thought it was fun, and I really enjoyed learning about pregnancy tests.
Nice. That's cool.
I'll be able to think about that.
Yeah. What's a category we could even do on this?
I couldn't think of a single one. Huh. But one thing I thought was fun is, remember when you told me that you were going to have your first kid on air recording a podcast?
I do remember that. Yep. Yeah, we really got you.
Yeah, you did. And I was like, I'll save doing the chemistry of a pregnancy test, later until something fun happens.
Yeah.
And it just never happened. And then Latila asked, so, it would be crazy if I was like, and I'm pregnant. I'm not, that I know of.
Yeah.
It would be even more crazy if I wasn't.
Right.
And then we had to come back and do an addendum of this episode. Surprise, surprise. Melissa didn't know in this episode.
Yeah, that would be crazy.
But then, so I was kind of saving it. It had been on my list for a while. But then when Latila asked, I was like, oh, yeah, let's do it. Why not?
And it's cool how it connected to like the direction we ended up going with the last episode about plants. Yeah. There's like different things at play that have some similarities that are cool to talk about next to each other. So that's cool.
The only thing I could think is like, what's the weirdest place that you've urinated? Because,
Oh, yes. Okay, let me think.
Or what's your favorite pregnancy? But that feels like, you have multiple children, so it seems kind of like a not fair category.
Yeah.
My own birth, yeah.
Yeah, my own. I really enjoyed it. I will say that my wife will say that our third kid was the easiest pregnancy in several ways because she preferred the time of year that the harder, later trimesters were happening in. The third trimester was happening in the winter. She was like, I loved that. That was so much better.
Okay, so try to give birth in January or February?
I think so. I mean, that's what she would say.
Okay, good to know.
That being in the last trimester in the summer in Texas for our first two kids was not her favorite.
Okay, so that would mean like get pregnant right now.
Yeah, probably so. Like, I think you're pregnant right now would be like a November, December birth, something like that.
Yeah.
So you'd have a little bit, like, I think January, February, March, kind of thing would be probably fine.
Great.
Just if you happen to be someone who's wondering about this and you would, this is secondhand knowledge from my wife, but that's what her thought is after having 3 kids. So, yeah.
I do have a good story about a fun place that I've urinated.
I was thinking like, I probably do, but I just can't think of one. So
you have pregnancy stories, so you kind of win on that.
Yeah, but I wish I had a urination story. So I'll take,
Okay, so here's the most peaceful urination I've ever had.
Okay.
So I unfortunately I cannot anatomically pee standing up, which is, I think, a little unfair.
Right.
But your wife told me,
yes,
she's a real star of this episode, about a device called a pee style.
Yes.
That you can use to pee standing up.
Oh, yeah.
And I had one terrible camping trip where the pit toilets were so disgusting and I was miserable the whole time. And that was enough for me to get this. I was kind of hesitant because it feels a little bit weird. And it is amazing. You can literally pee standing up.
Yeah, I loved, so the reason that my wife discovered this is because we went on a camper van trip around New Zealand for like 2.5 weeks or so. And it was one of those things that she had seen recommended. It's like, hey, this is honestly just smart to have. You don't have a bathroom in your camper van. You don't know where you're going to be.
Yep.
And where there's going to be bathrooms and stuff. And just makes it, you're more versatile.
Yeah.
So she bought one. And then every time she used it, she was like, I can't believe I'm standing up. Like,
it's amazing.
Yeah. It was just like so crazy to not know any different. Right. And she'd be like, I mean, standing up, I understand the pros and I understand the flexibility it affords me, but I don't know different.
Yeah.
So it's like, this is just how it is.
It's amazing. She was like, it's so weird and wonderful, right? Okay. So I got that and I had already used it a bunch when we were training for hiking because you're just like hiking for hours. We were training for this big hiking trip, but we went on our big camping trip and my life had been in a lot of flux, but I'd been offered my job. We'd been planning for this trip for a very long time. It's like one of those like, okay, this is a trip that I've been dreaming about kind of thing. And we finally were on it. And so it was like everything we'd been thinking about, everything we'd been planning for, it was like, okay, we're here. We like are on the trip. And we left really early in the morning from where my husband's family lives in Amarillo. And so there's nobody out there on the road at like 3. Maybe we left at like 4. And so we just watched the sunrise, and it's like so nice. And we've been on the road. We left really early. So the sun is just rising, and we've been on the road already for hours. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I think I have to go to the bathroom, you know? And he was like, you want to just pull over real quick? And I didn't realize that I could do that. I was still in the mindset of needing to look for a gas station.
Right.
And there was nobody around. So it was not like...
Right. It was like, this is a pretty good first test of this, maybe. Like,
well, I'd used it a few times already.
Oh, yeah.
But I was like, I didn't know I could do this.
Yeah.
And so we just pulled over on the side of the road, and it was like so cool. And it was Texas summer. It's so hot, but the first few like minutes of sunrise is like the nicest part of the day.
Yeah.
The sun was rising. It was so cool. There was birds chirping. I was literally watching the sunrise. No one was around. It was so quiet, just fields for miles. And I was like, this is the nicest, most beautiful place I have ever urinated in my life.
Yeah, that's cool.
And
I'm getting to do it in this way that is only recently unlocked.
Yeah, if I had been squatting for that, and I would have been worried, like, oh, what if somebody drives by? I'm not exposed.
Yeah.
No, I just get to stand up and just enjoy nature.
Right.
And how beautiful it is. And like that, we were on the trip, and I was like, this is the nicest. This is so nice. Mm-hmm. Anyway, sorry to all of you who hate bodily fluid stories. We don't tell them very often, but
that's true, right? Yeah. Hopefully, when you clicked on the episode about pregnancy tests, you thought this would be included.
Yeah, urine might be
related to bodily fluids would be.
Listen, and not a sponsor, but get you a pee style. I have purchased one. If you're someone who can't pee standing up, I have purchased one for every woman in my life. Mm-hmm. Everyone, anyone. I'm like, you deserve this. You deserve this experience. Gross gas station bathrooms, not anymore.
Yeah.
You have to go in a disgusting pit toilet, and you have to put your bottom down on it. Mm-hmm. Not anymore.
Yep.
So can't awesome. Recommend it enough. It is the single most important thing for me to bring when I'm in the outdoors.
Nice.
So, and on road trips in general.
Yeah.
Because even gross gas station bathrooms.
Yep. Totally.
Stand up.
Huge. Yeah. Very, very simple, like invention, tool, whatever. That is just huge benefits.
Life changing.
Yeah.
At least for outdoors. All right. Well, on that note, thanks for letting me share that. And thanks for your wife for all of the benefits she has given me.
Shout out to her for this episode, the many times she's come up in this one, and for just being cool. And
she is cool.
Thank you to Latila for asking this question. And even though it's on the list for a bit, you put it over the edge for this episode to happen. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
If you have a question, thought, idea, follow up, anything like that, we'd love to hear that on our website, chemforyourlife.com, yourlife.com, to share your thoughts, ideas, questions with us. If you'd like to help us keep our show going and contribute to cover the cost of making it, you can join our super cool Chem community of patrons on patreon.com/chemforyourlife. Different tiers, different ways of us saying thank you. You get ad-free feed of the show, extra bonus episode every month, different things for us to say thank you for keeping the show going, keeping it free for everybody. And just like Latila, she's part of that community, just like Vince, part of that community, Chem community. But if you're not able to do that, you can still help us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app, rating, writing, reviewing Apple Podcasts on Spotify, subscribing to our YouTube channel. Those things help us to share chemistry with even more people, help us to be discovered by others, and so they can learn about the chemistry happening right under their noses in their everyday life.
This episode of Chemistry for Your Life was created by me, Melissa Collini, and him, Jam Robinson. And of course, this episode was made possible. The creation of this episode was made possible by that community that Jam was just talking about. And so we want to thank every one of them by name. So we want to thank Vince W. Welcome, newest member, first on our list today. Julie S., Heather R., Autoclave, Chelsea M., Doreen V., Scott B., Jesse R., Sierra L., John T., Jeanette N., Cullen R., Erica B., Elizabeth P., Sarah M., Rachel R., Latila, Thanks for this episode, Latila, Katrina B, Suzanne P, Venus R, Lynn S, Jacob T, Brian K, Emerson W, Christina G, Timothy P, Stephen B, Chris and Claire S, Chelsea B, Avishai B, and Hunter R. Thank you all so much for supporting us and believing in us and making this show keep going.
And if you'd like to know more about today's chemistry lesson, you can check out the references for this episode in our show notes or in the description of the video on YouTube.
Yay, chemistry!
Yay, chemistry!